Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of our castovers may contain dog. But besides that, we have Veeq7 taking on Hupsaiya on Fata Morgana. That's a lot of A's, and I'm here for it. So let's see what our first match has in store for us. We have the Glacial Protoss of Veeq in the top left against the Darkspring Green Protoss of Hupsaiya in the top right. Yes, Hupsaiya, the Starcraft 2 streamer and personality. I think it's easy to call him a personality. He certainly has that in spades. He's known for being Twitch banned for saying the word Mongoloid. I think that's what most people know him for, and certainly what I know him for. And he's an honorable Protoss player. He even says GLHF, dude, because really when you see him get angry in StarCraft 2, it's because StarCraft 2 is just a terrible game. But he plays Cosmonarchy Brood War now, and Cosmonarchy Brood War isn't a terrible game, so he's happy, he's at home, he feels like he is one of the No Frauds Club, one of the not frauds. Anyway, he's going to go ahead and scout Veeq, who is, of course, another not fraud, a long-time not fraud, the homie himself. The homie him-7th, actually. And, yeah, he's going to go ahead and see, hey, my opponent has 400 APM. Let me block his gateway. Oh, is it gateway first? It's gateway first for both players? Yeah, okay, well, some things never change. Just like in StarCraft 2, Protoss versus Protoss involves gateways. Now, it doesn't always have to. I did play against iSarcasm, somebody who you guys may have seen in the previous castover, or two castovers ago, I think, from Mesk, cast at a game where I played it as Terran. Hupsaiya has confused himself and thinking this is an XY map, so of course Veeq is just bullying him as a result of that. But yeah, he's, you know, iSarcasm, a good player overall as far as like the general level, I would say. Like, he seems to know what he's doing. He likes to expand. His macro slips sometimes, and look at this cheek from Veeq. Veeq, more like cheek, and he's getting absolutely bodied by the Hupsaiya scribes. Hey, Hupsaiya knows to use the geyser at least. This is rude. This is just rude. Well, now you've got it. Now you're fucked, buddy. You can't even harvest it anymore. You can't even cheek. Anyway, the point I was trying to make about iSarcasm is that I did play against him. I went the classic gasless builds where I didn't harvest any gas the entire game. And I ended up losing one of those because I spammed Legionnaires. But then I spammed Vassals and won. And then I spammed Zealots and won with some double proxy gate, like double forward gate. So that was cool. Those matches were on Nitro Valley. I don't think they're going to get published anywhere, and I don't think I still have the replays anyway, but it was a good time. You know, those are memories that iSarcasm will never forget. This is, of course, going to feature the new Drakiden graphic, but I don't think it's the most recent version of that particular graphic. The Drakidens are scouting around, doing some crab walking, trying to figure out, wait, what's going on here? Why can I turn? I can actually see different size depending on what angle I'm facing. And hey, we found the thief. The thief has been discovered. Quick, get him. And indeed, he will be gotten because Veeq is not evacuated fully. So this Drakiden will go ahead and bop the scribe. Yeah, that's it. GG, dude. You just lost your scribe. You got nothing else. You didn't build a single unit. JK, he's got 2 Drakidens. We do, of course, otherwise just have the same sort of thing. Very, you know, if you're coming here from StarCraft 2 because you're a Hupsaiya fan, you might be wondering, it's 3 minutes into the game. Why aren't they at max supply? Well, we don't have supply on Cosmonarchy Brood War, and also we have actual pacing to our game, so you can enjoy that too. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So, by the way, I hope Hupsaiya doesn't watch this on his stream, because I did say the Mongoloid word, which I don't think you can say on Twitch, but that's a Monka TOS moment. Can I get a Keck W in the chat, ladies and gentlemen? And we do have more Drakidens coming. Big surprise. However, Veeq has opted for an expansion, so it's time to get a little bit serious here, because Hupsaiya has opted for a Stargate, and there's a second gate coming from Veeq. By the way, we should probably rename Gateway and Stargate. What do you guys think? Should we call them Ultralisk? But the Drakidens are going to go ahead and start frontlining. In PvP, as in StarCraft 1, the same is true for StarCraft 2, as well as CMBW. You have the same kinds of units. Well, you need to make sure you don't trade them too poorly, and there you go. The first casualty is going to be on Hupsaiya's side of the situation. Now his Stargate's halfway done. Veeq controlling the middle of the map, making sure that if he wants to take a ground path, he's going to have to go around the map, and unlike in StarCraft 2, that actually takes time, because units don't move at the speed of light. Drakidens getting focused down here. The third from Hupsaiya is only going to join after the second dies. Now, 2 of these are very bruised, but he's actually not able to finish the job, and he's targeting the one that has full HP instead of the one that has no HP, because perhaps he doesn't recognize that this game you don't get to just hold Alt and see all of the health bars, or enable it in settings. Yeah, we don't have that technology yet, but I was working on it. Whether I will continue working on it is yet to be determined. Hupsaiya now setting up his Nexus, but Veeq's has already finished. The Stargate is out. Okay, this is actually almost like a bait. I mean, he's got enough minerals almost to do it, but Yeah, it looks like he's going to go do that. I wonder if he cleared a queue or something to free up the resources for it. An Exemplar is coming. When you have Dracodon Exemplar, that does beat just pure Dracodon, and it is just pure Dracodon coming out here. A DF-style play. Those you guys who don't know, Darkened Fantasies, abbreviated to DF, is known for spamming Dracodons because that's what he did when he played the project against me for the first time, and I barely held on with a bunch of bunkers, as they were called back then, because they weren't called anchors yet. All right, so these units are starting to get a little bit beleaguered here. Veeq is hemorrhaging hull damage, and obviously we are closer to the reinforcement point for Hupsaiya, but it's still 4 with 2 more joining. Actually, this is still quite lethal. The Exemplar does finish, so it's going to need to be leveraged immediately. There's not going to be any surprises here, and so that Exemplar could just end up getting focused down. It's not being kited backwards, which is a really big error, I would say, from Hupsaiya's side, and he will indeed GG. The early Stargate not favoring him, and yeah, Hupsaiya, I mean, come on, dude, you can't just lose a game that I'm casting. You got to win them all, especially since I expect you to make it through that qualifier to Ascension number 7 undefeated. I don't want you to drop a single map. So let's go see if Hupsaiya can redeem himself by jumping back in to the same set, but map number 2. Now this time around, it's the same exact spawns as before, and Hupsaiya was AFK for part of the game. Oh no, my workers don't automatically mine for me. God damn it. Well, Hupsaiya is in the top right. He is not the Lemon Protoss, that's Veeq. He's the Platinum Blue Protoss. So there you go. The main character of today's cast over is clearly Hupsaiya because he's a cool guy. Chat, if you guys think Hupsaiya is... Alright, I'll stop that. I'll take a sip. A sponsored sip, in fact, because if you guys like Cosmonarchy Brood War, you guys like the videos that I do, you guys like the work that Veeq and myself and DF, etc. have done down the eons, Veeq and I take donations. The rest of the crew doesn't because they have other sources of income and they seem fine right now. But I guess technically Veeq also seems fine right now, but generally speaking, you know, we do take donations, and they do help because they alleviate the strain. You know, I've recently had to pick up a couple extra shifts around work, but that's mostly due to the holidays. I want to have some extra capital to be rubbing together so I can buy everybody fancy presents. But beyond that, you know, if you do happen to have, I don't know who the fuck has extra money these days, because in this economy, are you kidding me? But, you know, if you do happen to have that and you want to throw it at us, you can go to the coffee link that is in the bottom right. Hey, there's a double gate coming up over here, so it's well, a gate from either player. But interestingly enough, Hupsaiya decides he doesn't really want to wait for his scribe to go all the way down here and build a pylon and then build a gateway. No, he wants something else. Wow! Dude, that was some Starcraft 2 micro right there. I mean, I don't know what was going on. But yeah, interestingly enough, he doesn't seem too interested in actually scouting his opponent. In fact, I'm not even sure that his scribe in the bottom left of the map in the last game went up to the top left, or if it just returned home. I assume he did go ahead and scout the starting location, but you can never be sure. Now the gateway is under attack, and, you know, that's just ridiculous. How could you do something like that? Interestingly enough, you know, something that really was kind of telling is that Veeq was not interested in building anything other than Dracodons unless he was forced to. And I think if there had been a little bit more time to get that Stargate online, or a little bit more, you know, pressure, in theory, Hupsaiya should have actually had the advantage, since the Nexus took a lot longer for Veeq to put down than, say, the Stargate did. But obviously, I think Veeq was probably only harvesting a little bit of Vespene. Yeah, he's only harvesting with 1 worker right now. That's probably the difference, right? Because Hupsaiya was harvesting with 3 workers, and he still is. So it looks like he's going to go for something very similar here as he scouts behind his base for proxy shenanigans. Veeq has been known to do that. In fact, the last time we casted him versus Nablime, the first video of that particular set included a lattice over here against Nablime's Terran, and it was silly. Well, it looks like the bridges of Tar and Death have claimed another victim. Veeq's scribe is now in the mud. And looks like there will be a bit of a trade here. Obviously, wow, that was like a chicken fight, and Veeq blinked first. Hupsaiya just giga-chatted him, even though he absolutely did not have the advantage in that fight and would have died before. But now, he really doesn't have the advantage, and he falls away. And you know what? When you start falling away, that's when you've really made your mistake. But it's another fight here where he's going to go ahead and try his best to see if he can focus down any of this stuff from happening. So he's actually traded pretty well here, all things considered, kiting backwards. specifically trying to kite away with the low HP Drakiden, which is now being chased. That was a little bit of a miss micro there moment, but that's okay, because now his reinforcement, since he was closer to his base, Defender's Advantage kicks in. Units don't move at the speed of light. Holy shit. That means that Hupsaiya can now push back the beleaguered Veeq7 Drakidens. But can he really? Because now there's a third one, and it just keeps happening. And also 3 idle workers. Oh. But it's okay, because Veeq had 2 idle workers and a scout worker. So that's kind of cool. I think his, like, he randomly sent another worker across the map. He's going to go ahead and add a second gateway. Now, behind this, we do have a rogue gallery coming. I think rogue galleries are pretty based. I think this is, however, before the fixes to the Kabbalist teleportation. Or it's technically also a fix to the Legionnaire teleportation, but the Kabbalist had the bigger problem. The Kabbalist is our name for the Dark Templar. And I know in StarCraft 2, you guys will be aware of that they added like a Shadow Stride blink or whatever for the that you can research at the Dark Shrine researching stuff. But in this game, you just build the Kabbalist, and it has a blink. While it's cloaked, it will teleport to an attack target. So if you order it to attack this Kabbalist, and it's within some sort of minimum distance to proc it, it will just instantly teleport, close the gap. Now, there were some issues when it would approach diagonally, where sometimes it would just have an issue where it just wouldn't teleport into melee range. And look at this, Hupsaiya actually taking a sneaky base towards that 3 o'clock position. You maybe say that would... That's not quite 3:30, that's like 3:15 or something. Or maybe it... No, maybe it actually is 3:30. We'll just call it 4 o'clock. You know what? We'll split the difference. But it's not going to be Kabbalists, so we don't even really have to talk about that. Also, Lemon looks pretty good on this Drakiden. I mean, it almost looks like there is no team color. This is the naked Drakiden model. I should soy face for the thumbnail and like a screenshot of these Drakidens and be like, naked Drakiden, like naked in the you know, we'll see if that gets the eyeballs. You know, gone wrong, gone sexual, etc. But yeah, we have a couple of Barghests. We got the Drakiden out. Okay, that's going to be an interesting choice. I mean, Barghests aren't super good versus armor. They're mostly... I think what the Barghests are going to be here for is, like, Hupsaiya is going to try to hold this push with only Drakidens using Focus Fire and the range advantage you get. You can see there you get +2 weapon range targeting units on the low ground. Oof. Absolutely bopped. Now, that should make Veeq a little suspicious here. He sees the Scribe coming back, and I feel like he should absolutely start looking around at that 4 o'clock base or maybe some other location for a hidden base. Like, why would there be a Scribe with minerals in its mouth? You know what I mean? Whenever these things happened, the probe in StarCraft 2 had the minerals, I always thought made it... it felt like it was just a tooth or something. It just looked goofy as fuck. So that, to me, was always funny. Where I looked at that, and I would just think, like... Dude, see a dentist, you know what I mean? But yeah, like, why would it have minerals in its mouth? Why would it be flying over there? Well, maybe I should look around. But it doesn't look like Veeq is interested. His Drakidens are busy modeling for Playboy. Play plant, I guess, because Protoss are plants. I don't know if you knew that. They get their energy from the sun, and therefore they are plants. We have 6 Drakidens on the ramp here versus the 7, soon to be 9, soon to be 10. And here come the Barghests. 5 of them. They can absolutely overpower this Warden if they choose to attack it, and the Drakidens do have to scurry on home. This is the result of Veeq deciding to not poke up too deep, and, you know, pretty good response there. We got some Zealots here. Those will help versus the air units, right? Yeah, honestly, I think Veeq is in a pretty steep amount of trouble, although, admittedly, he doesn't have that poor of an economy, like, overall. His worker count is pretty comparable to Hupsaiya's still, despite losing a bunch, and now Hupsaiya has hemorrhaged a Barghest. The biggest problem is that he's escaped all of the pressure here. All of the pressure in the low ground. Oh, that Warden's just dead, right? Okay, he knew it. I guess he was just using it to sort of buy some time. Maybe stop the bleeding a little bit. So, yeah, if we hold Alt, we see the current actual count, and he's only down by 4 or 5 workers. And he will obviously change that over time. So it's not as bad as maybe he thinks it is, because Hupsaiya has not been able to double produce workers and waypoint them over here, since for a while there was a ground army in his way, so he couldn't actually transfer anything. Now he's, since then, started to equip his army with Vagrants, which are actually going to be deceptively good in this particular case, since when they do end up getting popped, they have a passive where they come back as a temporary version of themselves with double movements, or 150% movement speed, 150% attack speed, something like that. It might be double, actually, but I think it's it might be just 1.5x. It's one of those two. Anyway, they're very good, is the point. So if you decide to focus them down, then they actually gain short-term bonuses, so you only want to really do that when you're disengaging, or you want to save them for last. But if you save them for last, then they can dish out a decent amount of damage while they still exist. So it's a kind of like an interesting choice that it forces out of your opponent. Now, in this case, Veeq only has the 3 Zealots, but absolutely, Hupsaiya can kite backwards and just shoot. He's actually frontlining with the Vagrant, which is good because now it's turned into the Shade, which obviously is going to have the increased attack rate. And he's going to go ahead and... I mean, he's not really using it in this particular case super well. You can see there it did end up popping. He's got a low HP one over here, and he's fallen back with his melee units, which is not really what you want to do. It looks like he's going to try to correct that error now. The Nexus and the Scribe's kind of like occupying some of the attack move choices here for Veeq, and, well, the Scribe does end up going down. And it looks like now is going to be the attempt at finishing the job here. And I think Veeq probably has overextended with his ground army. I'm not sure that he has... I mean, look at this, right? He's got almost 1,200 minerals. So he missed a couple of macro cycles during that. He's withdrawing with 5 of his Dracodons. He does have 3 more from his macro cycle, 3 more coming, and 3 more on the way. So, okay, it's going to be a pocket Argosy for him. Now, this is a tight decision because when we're looking at the way Hupsaiya is setting himself up, he's going up to 3 bases, but he doesn't have an embassy for detection. That's where you get your witnesses, the name for observer in CMBW. So you would want to build that. If he remembers that that's where that comes from, then maybe he's in the clear, but he wants to be able to scout his opponent, right? Neither of our players actually have that coming. It looks like they're both kind of existing within the dark and just seeing if they can hold out with the mass gateway tech. Now, obviously, Rogue Galleries are adding in some Vagrants, some Kabbalists. We're big fans of that. We even have some Ecclesiasts joining the fray. Those are new units that buff the shields of nearby allies. They regenerate some of the shields of nearby allies. And as a result, you'll end up seeing them work in such a way that basically when you heal shields, you proc flash shielding, and flash shielding exists for all of the resources here that we have, right? All of the Protoss units. So the only units that actually, funnily enough, don't regenerate shields are the Vagrant Shades, because obviously they degenerate instead, right? So back when the Augur existed, that was also one such case. But yeah, so you can kind of see what I'm going after there, where you have the shield buffs. The Ecclesiasts will proc that when they heal it, and they'll also be helpful when the enemy frontline engages your Striders. But there actually is no frontline here. And after a certain point of massing up the Striders, you do hit diminishing returns where you can't really engage in these tight choke points. So Hupsaiya on 3 bases, going up to a 4th base in the bottom right at some point soon, as Veeq is also thinking about taking the... Oh no, he's actually going to go ahead and scout, so that's interesting. He should end up seeing both of these bases then, if he's going to go ahead and do that. The Kabbalists are out. It would have been really sick if they went to the bottom, like 6 o'clock base or whatever, and then just bopped the Scribe before it could actually see anything, but obviously that's not something that you necessarily expect. And Veeq is going to take the inner sort of, I guess that would be 11 o'clock base. So that's going to be his 3rd. And yeah, the bottom right is indeed going to be scouted. And so too will be that 4 o'clock position we were talking about earlier. And when he sees the amount of workers on here just harvesting minerals, then he should know, okay, this base has actually been up for a little bit now. Both of our players very, very low on gas. We queued up 1,000,000 charlatans. That's not really what you want to do, and he cancels that as well. Queues up some Acantors instead. Doing some interesting things. Now, it's funny because Veeq actually left a comment on one of my streams recently where he mentioned that, unfortunately, he ends up losing that one of the Kabbalists. They did not accomplish much. If he attacked with a couple extra ones, hey, what's going on here, Veeq? You can't do this to a man. What the hell? He just warped in triple Warden, and Hupsaiya has not seen it. Now, that's funny as fuck to me. Your base? My base, actually. All right, the Dracodons storm the front. Going to go ahead and wipe out this 4 o'clock base. Hupsaiya is in trouble once again. 2 gates being added. He only has the Ardent Authority. He's not actually getting anything here, and he wasn't harvesting Vespene from this base either, so it didn't really necessarily pay off. He's going to go ahead and storm in afterwards. A couple of units occupying it, and he's going to try to take an engagement here. You can see him wisely moving most of his army up the ramp such that he can engage a little bit easier. But here's the Solarian coming in from Veeq. Now, this is, of course, the nerfed Solarian set. You can see it builds the Stewards a lot slower. It has more armor, and that's pretty much it. But the front line has chewed through his Dracodons on the other side, and the Vagrants have been doing pretty well at dealing with all the Stewards. And that is exactly the situation you don't want Solarians in, is versus a large amount of hit scan attacks, instant hit attacks. And there's an Acantor for good measure. Iquare striking the Veeqinator down. But at the same time, these Nexuses have been destroyed. So honestly, Veeq is going to be feeling pretty good about himself. And he didn't lose the Solarian. He just lost the Steward. So it'll be back in action pretty soon. The eye-blindingly bright epigraph, or large epigraph thruster is also firing off here. And it looks like we've got another Solarian. And yeah, 2 more Solarians coming. So at some point, you're going to get to a critical number of Solarians where it doesn't really matter that they have a lot of Vagrants or Dracodons or whatever. You will still be able to absolutely bop them. So looking pretty good over here, adding a couple of additional wardens across that bridge, but that's not where Hupsaiya is targeting. He's going to see if he can go ahead and crack the code over here, but this is a lot of mass air. And again, okay, yeah, you've got a lot of the stewards dying over here, but if there's enough support, although these gateways are idle right now, and there's only the one epigraph, I'm not 100% sure that it's going to be enough. Now, the stewards are actually falling, but at the same time, the Zealots are staying alive because they're not receiving most of the focus, and Hupsaiya is very, very focused on this particular fight, and it looks like he's going to go ahead and thin the herd. So, you know, at the same time, his army is a lot smaller than it used to be. He's adding in more units. The Cantor's wiggling their way over. He never ended up resetting up these bases, so he is a little bit on a timer. You know, it's not exactly an all-in situation, but he's now going to go ahead and take that 1 o'clock position over there in the sort of upper right-hand side of the map. Now, we have 4 Solarians. It could be more. There's a second epigraph as well. Can they charge forward and deal with it? They're still not really doing a lot of attack moving. You can kind of think of the epigraph as something equivalent to the Terran Centaur in some ways. It's this sort of fast-moving destroyer, but it will be focused down. Second one coming, and indeed it is going to get bopped. But we still have the Solarians, and at this point, they are still going to be at a good enough number where they will be able to pick off the remaining units. The Zealots even buying a little bit more time, kiting them up towards the Wardens. You can't really back up too much. The Cantors can even be focused down so that the base defenses stay alive, and indeed, it looks like that's exactly what's going to happen. However, there are some more Draconids coming in from that lower bridge, that thinner bridge there, and it looks like maybe some of the workers will end up getting destroyed. So this is actually pretty good focus fire coming out from Hupsaiya. Obviously, his Solarians needed to be proactively microed forward if they wanted to easily, you know, chase down these units. And actually, now that these Vagrants are steroided up, they're even going to go ahead and, oh, just narrowly missed out on popping that Warden. Like, one more shot would have done it, it looks like. I thought for sure they had it. Solarians are now going to go ahead and start migrating over towards that 1 o'clock position. And during this whole time, I actually don't see, you know, a large number of Positrons or Architects, which would really start putting the hurt on these Solarians. But, yeah, instead I see absolutely nothing coming out of the Ardent Authority, and there's only a small spattering of units here. Hupsaiya is in trouble. His opponent massing Solarians, Veeq noobing him to death. That seems to be what's happening here, because I don't really see how Hupsaiya can get him back from this position. As soon as this Nexus pops, which of course it does, Hupsaiya is in deep doo-doo. He never really set this Nexus back up, and he is going to call GG. A large portion of this fight brought to you by the Wardens. IDK, by the way. OP. They're not OP. He could have built Architects. He could have built Positrons. I like that. All right, so let's fast forward here, because I'm wondering. Apparently, they decided to do some testing, where they went for just to see what could actually kill them. Yeah, okay, they're going to do some testing. So yeah, it looks like he's going to go for land effects. He's going to try it. I'm curious, so we might as well stick around here. We maybe will learn a thing or two. I'm glad that happened. All right, what's he got? He's just massing land effects. I wonder how many. We'll see what he has. Yeah, I think this is too many Solarians, to be honest, but I don't know. I mean, he's just getting bopped. At this point, he has more Solarians than the guy had land effects, so I feel like that's probably not a true test of the situation. But anyway, that was kind of interesting. And that is going to be our second match. I did like that Hupsaiya called Veeq dumb and bad. I feel like that's pretty funny. That's some high-quality KEKW moments you can post in your Twitch chat and post to Instagram and repost to Twitter. It's now x.com/Fata Morgana game number 3 versus Hupsaiya and Veeq. And Hupsaiya, you can tell because he's the guy with no instant movement on his workers, because he's used to Starcraft 2 doing that to himself. He's in the top left. And he's up against Veeq, who, that's the Alice Blue Hupsaiya against the Midnight Green Veeq, top right. So, back on the same map. Hope you guys appreciate that Veeq is, of course, the author of this map, so of course he's spamming games on this map. I actually have more games, I think, on this map, although they might be on Impetus, which is a new map that he made, that some people have called, apparently, I think BiddyB called it the successor, or spiritual successor to Repulsion. I think it's a completely different map, but it happens to be space platform, so I think maybe that's where BiddyB's thinking that. Anyway, regardless, just BiddyB catching strays in the middle of the match. Yeah, Veeq is, of course, an author of this map, so he's been spamming games on this map. He has some matches against Hamster that I have to cast later on too. But we're going to see how this one goes out, and I appreciate seeing some people trying to test versus Solarians. Yeah, I still feel like Architects would have done a great job versus that situation. He had the Ardent Authority already. But another thing is that it didn't really seem like he was super proactive in denying bases or taking map control. I think he would have had an overwhelming economy versus Veeq's situation if when he was taking the 1 o'clock base, he still had 4 o'clock and the bottom right up. You know what I mean? If that situation had transpired, if Hupsaiya was able to defend or at least quickly respawn those bases, he wouldn't even needed 1 o'clock because he was taking the bottom right at the time where the wardens tickled him to death. And that's just like Veeq kind of thinking quickly and also kind of sillily, in a silly way. And he's actually going to go for, oh no, Hupsaiya is going to go for lattices. I'm used to Veeq being in the top left. So the lattice has vassals. It doesn't really have anything else that's super good versus Protoss, and even vassals I'm not 100% sure are super good versus Protoss, but I did kill iSarcasm with them, so I will always maintain that they're pretty based. But I don't know if it's going to work versus somebody like Veeq. He knows the project pretty well, and he knows that he can just put down like a Matrix or two, or maybe an Engram if things get really bad with mass vassals. It's going to be Sims instead, the scribe hanging out in the top left corner, the 0-0 coordinate, for those who know. And this guy on your screen taking a sip. Absolute tickles, and here comes a Dracoden. Three. Three was not enough. Oh, Veeq is going to go ahead and poke his head over here, see what's going on. Now, if Hupsaiya was Super Giga Chad, he could have walked into the scribe and made the scribe attack it 4 times, and then he would have gotten a free simulacrum, because that's how that works. But it doesn't look like he's aware of that mechanic. Yeah, if you you got to watch out versus lattice openers. This is something that doesn't happen too often. But if you leave your worker idle and your enemy walks into melee range of the worker automatically starts to attack the unit. And if you don't attack the unit, then they don't get a notification. So they have to actually be physically looking at their minimap and see the dot come close and then like pay attention to it or whatever. Or happen to just look back at their worker at the time to stop it. So if you just sort of dance in melee range, the worker will deal damage to the sim. And after 4 attacks, it will break the shields. Because 3 attacks technically set the shields to 0, but then the 4th attack deals hull damage. And the cool thing about that is that when Simulacra take hull damage, they start to split. 5 seconds after that, a new Simulacra pops out, it inherits the old HP, and starts to regenerate shields. So that is pretty cool, and definitely something that you could potentially be doing to farm, a free 75 minerals or whatever. Maybe there are 100 minerals now. I don't remember. I think they're 75, though. We also have Double Dracoden Hierophant here as a fast expansion, 1-gate expand. We have 3 sims and an idol. I mean, the idol's going to be okay. The problem is that there's not really a whole lot of, like, sustain versus the Dracodens. I don't know that the Sims are going to do super well in this situation, but let's see how the micro is. Maybe, yeah, especially with the 3rd Dracoden. Like, the amount of resources here for Veeq in units is way higher than Hupsaiya. And he's already going to start to lose the Idol, getting body blocked a little bit as he tries to focus down the Hierophant. It's not really going to do a terribly good job. And here comes the Idol just to say hi and then leave. It could get caught by the Hierophant here. But the Hierophant was not in range to actually proc the slow. It's a little bit misleading there, where the Hierophant's range to project the slow aura is actually lower than its weapon range, which, honestly, I don't know if that's super good for the game, but it made it so that it was a bit more sane, particularly when, like, the Hierophant has cliff advantage, and it just, like, tags you once and you get slowed forever. So that's like, all right, great. All right, so the Hierophant and the Dracodens have marched on over to see the Nexus. About 75% done here for Hupsaiya. We do, of course, have the Legionnaires starting to strike out, and yeah, that Hierophant is going to go ahead and get bopped, so pay no heed to the fact that it's using the Dracoden Corpse. That's just because I haven't swapped it up for default Rubble yet. But don't worry, it will happen. Actually, what will really happen is that Balathal will at some point take the Dracoden, the baseline of the Dracoden, duplicate it for the Hierophant, start retooling it, and then we'll actually have a turning graphic from the Hierophant as well. We already actually have a wireframe in for the new Dracoden, but it wasn't available on this version of the game that they played, so they're still using the old wireframe as a result. I am now looking around just to see if we spot anything abnormal, but it's just a 2-gate situation. The Legionnaires have started to really force the Dracodens back, and the Idols aren't going to be super good in this particular use case, but they don't necessarily have to be super stellar just because they're ranged units that can attack, right? So at this point, you are indeed going to see this Dracoden over here could absolutely be focused down, but it doesn't actually look like it's going to happen. Here comes another Legionnaire and another Idol, and it looks like at this point we have, funnily enough, yeah. So at this point we've traded 2 Idols and a bunch of Legionnaires for a whole host of Dracodens, and I think that's still very cost efficient here for Hupsaiya. The idols are the only thing that's costing him Vespene in this equation, although he is starting to add in some Ecclesiasts as well. So he's got to keep that in mind as 3 Dracodons guard that small, thin bridge going into the 1 o'clock position. We also have a completely naked base here. Veeq is going to add a Warden. He's already added a defensive Warden over here in case of vassals, but we know that Hupsaiya is not planning on doing that. Like I said at the beginning, dude, he's an honorable Protoss player. He said GLHF once, and then he said, I think you're dumb and bad another time. And that's pretty honorable as far as Protoss go, generally speaking. Now, we do have Veeq saturating his Vespene all of a sudden. Looks like he's going to be aiming, or maybe he was always doing that, and I just noticed some weird wandering behavior or something, but it looked like he wasn't harvesting from the ridge until just moments ago. Starting to bank a decent amount of gas, so I think we're seeing a signal from him that he wants to tech switch. Now, Hupsaiya, on the other hand, has harvesting minerals predominantly from his base. We have 11 mineral harvesters here for Veeq, and only 8 from Hupsaiya, but he set his base up a little bit later, so that's to be expected. Veeq is actually at a pretty stark worker advantage anyway. Looking at this, he's up by 5 workers, which is, you know, again, maybe to be expected for how long the Nexus was up earlier than Hupsaiya's. However, Hupsaiya is keeping his minerals and Vespene low, continuing to make idols, continuing to make legionnaires. He's just queuing 1,000,000 units. Yeah, that's something I was meant to finish that thought. Veeq posted a comment on my stream saying that he hates when people queue units. Well, Hupsaiya is out here, a GM Protoss player, queuing those fucking units up, dude. Absolutely eviscerating your ground army right now. And I honestly don't think that queuing the units was necessarily a weak point in the 2 losses that Hupsaiya had, but we'll see. You know, this is a series of situations where Veeq has sort of been knowledge checking to some degree in a matchup that Veeq is more familiar with, and Hupsaiya hasn't played too much. He's got like 20 games under his belt, I think, as of right now. Maybe when this game was being played, it was even lower in terms of PvP matches, player versus player matches, not Protoss versus Protoss, but this specific matchup of Protoss versus Protoss is also quite hard for him to figure out. That Nexus does have to get canceled at 1 o'clock, so Veeq is going to go ahead and cede that ground. That means that his tempo is starting to evaporate, and so too is his worker advantage, where he's only up by 1 worker currently. So that's actually pretty considerable. He's also quite behind in terms of resources, workers and military is what I was thinking. So military units, but his Argosy is coming with a Solarian indeed. So here comes the Legionnaires. I feel like this situation has some power as long as the Legionnaires stay alive, and I think they're staying alive a little bit longer than they would normally thanks to the Ecclesiast. But the 5 Dracodons up here have essentially formed a firing squad, and that Warden, there's a lot of split damage in that fight, and that Warden was not focused down. But at the same time, there's only 7 Dracodons remaining that are actually on the field. There is a Golem out, which absolutely can do some damage, but mostly is there to absorb the damage, and right now he's kind of being focused down as a strange sort of withdrawal is happening. Somehow no units actually die, but a lot of them are ending up bruised. We have a grand library here, but nothing has been made out of it just yet because we queue a bunch of Legionnaires, and canceling whatever that was and turning it into a Warden seems like a good move. I think it might have just been slightly misplaced, adding a couple of Wardens over here. That's going to be okay, but when the Solarian starts increasing in quantity, and there's even a Didact to follow it up. Okay, so it's going to be a move out with 1 Solarian and what it looks like about 9 Dracodons indeed. So that's going to be a situation where Veeq he's got a couple more coming, so from 9 to 11, along with the Solarian. I don't think Hupsaiya has constructed any New York towers, but that's okay. We do obviously have the Didact coming up as a potential way to recall into the base. I don't think that's going to be as bad for Hupsaiya as it was for Nablime, but we, have to wait and see. Now, here comes the big engagement across the big bridge. The 2 Dracodons over here are going to get cleaned up by the Wardens. No problems there. We have an Atreus out here to fire some homing plasma onto the Stewards. And obviously, the Legionnaires are fighting back the Dracodons because the Solarian was busy focusing down the anti-air. 3rd Nexus is complete for Hupsaiya and 75% of the way there for Veeq, who's starting to distance mine a little bit inefficiently, especially considering he also has a worker deficit now, which is a startling turn of events, but it's not super extreme. And yeah, I guess that's just the macro coming out here from Hupsaiya, helping himself out. He's also going to go ahead and start using this base to create those, and has transferred a couple of workers. We have 16 on this base, and I want to say, yeah, we've got way more. It looks like 26 or so, because I selected some gas workers there on that base. The Didact is out. We are adding a lot of gateways, so going into 6 gate, 1 Argosy, going to be building a lot of units here, but Veeq is only now setting up actual mining operations at his 3rd base at 1 o'clock. So, both of our players have taken mirror positions on the map, but I feel like Veeq's force is going to be the one that can set the tone. A lot of it is going to come down to whether or not Hupsaiya takes a favorable engagement. And when you have the Didact cloaking most of your units, you know, that's going to be a situation where it's easier for Veeq to pick the start. He can also stasis a bunch of units. You know, there's a lot of potential power over here. Now, one of those Drakodons was actually outside of the cloaking field. And originally, I wasn't thinking that that was going to be super consequential, but it turns out it kind of was, because a lot of the Drakodons are thus split a little bit. A lot of these Legionnaires obviously did get stasis. There's another round targeting the backline there. And this is going to be a little bit of a problem, but the Didact is now out of energy, so it's going to need to wait a little bit longer before it can regenerate enough to cast another stasis. It has it now. It's going to go ahead and stasis only 4 units, but look at the ground army. It's completely eviscerated during that time. And the Solarian, it didn't even look like the Solarian was really attacking, but maybe it was just sort of, I wasn't paying too much attention there. A lot of the units are indeed getting bopped. We have enough for another stasis field, but it's going to need to take a while. And there we go. That's very impactful. It looks like only the Drakodon is remaining as a ground target, but, you know, what can you realistically do when you're, you know, disbarred from entering for 8 seconds? Another charge, indeed, coming in. A lot of stasises have been cast, but that Didact is losing a lot of HP. It's one shot away from any Drakodon or Idol from getting bopped. And actually, I say that, but here comes a host of Zealots from all of those gateways that were added. But at the same time, they were pushed forward, and the rest of the air kind of disengaged. So that is an awkward position there. I still think that with that huge stasis, he stasised a bunch of the stewards as well. I think Veeq will be able to hold out over here, getting a lot of mileage out of the spellcasters. We did have a Grand Library, but we don't actually have any Cantabuses or anything. So, you know, something that you could also do versus high HP units like the Solarian is you can cast Hallucinate on them, and that means that the Solarians obviously are in a pretty tight spot there. Because they'll take essentially 1.5 damage instead of 1 damage, you know, in terms of a multiplier. That's what the Hallucinate does. He made a prostration stage, but we don't see any pariahs, which could be really, really good versus the stewards, but they're also like, you know, single target type of units. He's sort of reading through the description now, thinking about what he wants to get. I would go for a pariah here. He's going to go for the Potentate instead, which is an unfortunate graphic right now. We have 12, by the way, Zealots that are going to charge up over here. And honestly, I think Veeq is in a pretty good spot. By the way, I forgot to update the overlay to say that Veeq is now 2-0 over Hupsaiya, so I'll go ahead and do that now because nothing important is happening right now. It's only Veeq going to go ahead and quash the 4th base as it finishes. So what is the reaction here? The units are going to be pulled. This is actually kind of a favorable engagement for Hupsaiya. I mean, he's not over the Wardens, but he can probably sneak up onto this Didact and start attacking it. And indeed, it looks like he's going to be able to. It just needs a couple more shots before it's dead. Oof! It gets the stun off, but there goes the Didact. That's 300 gas down. Now, he does lose the Nexus for it, and he's going to start getting sandwiched. Some of his units, his rally point was never adjusted. He's added a Matrix and a Warden at the 3rd base, but that's not going to be the target. The target is probably going to be the Natural at this point, because that's where Veeq is positioned, and I think maybe I'll be updating that scoreline pretty soon once again. The Potentates are out. Now, obviously, he does obviously have a... the Potentate has 2 different weapons. Potentate has a ranged weapon and a melee weapon. He can't use the melee attack versus air, so he's going to be using the ranged weapon instead. It does deal 30 damage, and 30 damage isn't quite enough by itself to make the stewards fly back, but yeah, with the Matrix firing to deal a decent amount of damage to a bunch of them, although mostly it's dealing with Zealots right now, I think. I'm not 100% sure. We're going to have to wait and see what happens here. What's the reaction from Hupsaiya? His gateways at the 3rd are unpowered. He needs to clear his queues, but I guess they'll get cleared automatically when they get destroyed. Yeah, he just ends up leaving with no GG this time, and that's going to be a 3-0 start for Veeq. Can Hupsaiya come back? We have one more game to find out. I now understand why Veeq submitted these replays, because he thinks, holy shit, I beat a StarCraft 2 GM streamer. Isn't that epic? Anyway, he's the Royal Blue Protoss in the top right against Hupsaiya, the aforementioned Royal, I almost said Royal Blue, Grandmaster Protoss. He is the Yellow Protoss in the top left. So the question for me really is, can Hupsaiya do some ridiculous, cheesy move or fast-paced play that just absolutely crushes Veeq before he's ready? I'm not 100% sure. I feel like it's technically feasible. We're about to find out, though. In this final match between these players, I only had the 4 replays. I'm going to cast them all. I did say the last time we were, funnily enough, we were on this map, we were casting Veeq versus Nablime, that I'm just sort of playing around with different video lengths to find something that seems to be good for everybody involved. And this time around, why not have a little bit of a longer video? Normally, I would actually break it around the 40-minute mark, but maybe this one won't be too long anyway. We'll find out. Again, I can kind of guesstimate based on the length of the replay, because that indicates the number of actions and stuff. But then I don't know how long my analysis afterwards is going to be. Sometimes I have a lot to say about certain matches or whatever, and so that can push it over. So you never really know what the length is going to be. And sometimes somebody might have low actions per minute, and then the file is a little bit misleading in terms of its length. So there's all sorts of things that could happen. But with these players, I think it's probably pretty safe to say, you know, they're spamming it up. They've got 500 actions per minute, 400 APM. Dude, that's the level. Now, I did like that Hupsaiya went for like a Lattice, a Legionnaire comp. Like Idle Legionnaire seemed to be doing pretty well versus Gateway exclusive units. It was really only when the Solarians showed up that changed. Now, maybe you can argue that if that amount of resources was pumped into additional gateways, then the result would have been the same and Veeq would have taken it as well. I'm not 100% sure, but it seemed possible. It seemed like you could potentially do it. So that's kind of interesting. Now, over here, Hupsaiya has once again gone for 3 workers on Vespene, whereas Veeq is happy grabbing just 1 worker on Vespene, because that's the amount that you need 100% throughput on Dracodons for using the gate. Adding a gate behind it and going for Manifolds this time. Manifolds are a unit where, when you see them, you usually are seeing them as like half a Dracodon in terms of durability and a DPS. But they do end up being pretty effective insofar as I think they're a little bit faster than the Dracodon. Even if they're not, they're acceptable as DPS style units. So we're going to have to wait and see what ends up happening here. Hupsaiya getting familiar with the flingy type, the acceleration and stuff of the unit. And with his Manifold out, I think, Veeq could be in a situation maybe he thinks he can go and be aggressive. But I'm not so sure about that. Now, the Scribe staying around, this is still something that we haven't really thought of as a community yet. But like, basically, what is the good answer? What is the good and true response when you see a situation like this, right? Do you take your worker, scout the enemy, and then try to bring it back home so that you get that extra economy? Because each worker is 15 seconds about in terms of its build time and deployment time and stuff. So is that going to be what you do? Or do you just want to permanently scout, lose a worker every single time, just so that you can confirm what your opponent does? Most people lose their worker. Most of the time, they do not actually fall back. And the reason why you would want to do that for the Lattice is because you want to know, is this going to be vassals? But even after the first unit pops out, it could still turn into vassals. So that's where you start to think, does it really matter? I mean, if I have a Dracon and I'm safe versus vassals, I just path it over into my base, or in this case, Veeq is warping in a Warden, which I think is a little bit wasteful, but it's because he wants to be able to move across the map without potentially dying to vassals. Although, again, he could probably just leave 1 Dracon in there. It would be the same amount of mineral expenditure, but you... I mean, the only thing you can say is that, like, this one allows him to be more aggressive, right? So maybe that's what he's angling for as he sends a Scribe out to his natural, undoubtedly to start saving up some resources for the purposes of expanding. But if he marches across the map and the Manifold Idle Legionnaire stack completely annihilates him, like, especially if Veeq goes up the ramp here, I think he's actually kind of toast, because he's going to try to expand, right? So he's going to end up cutting resources, and instead it looks like Hupsaiya will move out a little bit sooner than expected. The first Legionnaire has already fallen. We will have a little bit of focus fire at some point here from Veeq, I'm sure. Although at the same time, there was also a little bit of a change from Hupsaiya. He's not really going to be focusing down the low HP Dracodons, but the sort of secondary order consequence of that is that Veeq is now thinking, oh, I have a lot of Dracodons, but 2 of them are like moments away from death from this kind of army. We still don't have the Nexus coming up yet. It looks like Veeq wanted to send up a couple more military units into the queue, and both of our players will go ahead and secure their natural. Veeq a little bit faster on the ball, again, probably due to the queuing here, if we're honest. Hupsaiya could absolutely have it a little bit sooner, or maybe a lot a bit sooner, because he still has not yet put it down. And what's his reaction? There we go. We have it down. Again, that's like, I want to say maybe 10 seconds or 12 seconds or something like that, by the way. You always have to say, by the way, after 12, by the way. And that is going to be the Nexus popped up here. So yeah, I think Hupsaiya, if he didn't queue as much, if we're being fair, right, we got to give him some advice, because we're obviously better RTS players than him, which is why we can play Ahmed only runs and lose to him. The way that I would say is that that definitely contributes, right? But hey, he still has a pretty big army as a result of this queue, and this is where he can be absolutely lethal, right? We're seeing the Dracodons, again, some of them very low HP, some of them on the front line there, and so it looks like that was a trade of just 1 Zealot for 2 Legionnaires. So it's not spectacular, but it's something, and he's able to reclaim control, most importantly. He's got some Ecclesiasts that weren't with the army. They can absolutely be pretty good contributors. We've got going up to 4 gate here for Veeq, so he's soon going to have the production advantage over his opponent. And yeah, I mean, he's also going to have the Nexus out sooner. The macro has not slipped at all for the worker production, however. Like, maybe that's down to, again, queuing. But, you know, that does mean that Hupsaiya won't really be that far behind in terms of workers, despite having the Nexus finish a little bit sooner for Veeq. He's actually transferred workers the perfect amount if he wants to keep a good ratio of mineral harvesters. Well, almost the perfect amount. He could transfer one more. But it looks like he's not too interested in being super consistent with that. By the way, something that we've tried to do with the new maps is move the ridge to the other side so that you know that your gas workers are always harvesting differently. On this layout, it might be fine, but the one thing I'm noticing is that it's kind of hard to tell gas worker from mineral worker over here, or at least it's a little bit hard to select them. So maybe that's something small that Veeq can adjust if he so chooses, but that's something that we've tried to do with the new competitive maps. I don't think I remembered to update the mapping guide. It's not the mapping starter guide. It's like the map maker's toolkit or something. Map maker's guidebook. And so I don't think I ended up adding that. But yeah, we have a pretty strong military force out here from Veeq, but he's going to be attacking into I would say, a worse position here. But Hupsaiya is actually going to charge forward first. Now, he's got the splash. He has the idols. A decent number of them, in fact. So he's going to fall back here. And that is going to make Veeq think a little bit, you know, second guess his position over here. Can he realistically attack into that with all that splash from all those idols? We've got more gateways coming on the natural. Not a bad play. One thing I am noticing is that Hupsaiya, freed from the grasp of supply, has a grand total of 2 pylons at 7.5 minutes. Whereas you can kind of see here, Veeq has 1 pylon. Oh, Veeq also has 2 pylons. Never mind. Okay, both of our players are enjoying the fact that they don't need to build pylons unless they damn well want to. Nice terrain block. And other than that, yeah, I'm looking through this situation. I'm thinking it's kind of funny how, you know, they're both like spending the minimum amount of resources on pylons. Even though you could conceivably have like a better SimCity or a better situation for adding more production and stuff if you did decide to spend it. Now, we have these 2 giant blobs of Protoss military and forces sort of amassing in different locations here. If the gateways are here to slow down this attack, right, and then he attacks back over the bridge, I think this is actually going to be good for Hupsaiya, but we're going to have to wait and see as his force is kind of getting sandwiched here. But this force on the top right, besides splitting off some of the front line for Hupsaiya, isn't doing too much. Is that going to be enough for Veeq to claim victory over here? A lot of his front line is dying to the splash of the idols, and at the same time, reinforcements are getting intercepted by this front line from Hupsaiya that is still over there. At this point, neither player really has much of a front line. The Legionnaires come on in from reinforcements, but they are quickly melted by the idols. And at this, more reinforcements coming from Hupsaiya, he's closer to his reinforcement point. At that point, that was a crushing loss for Veeq. He did obviously whittle down the amount of units that Hupsaiya had, but you can look at the top right counter there. There's more units out for Hupsaiya. The question is, are they going to be as good as the units that Veeq can field? And since Veeq is mostly fielding Legionnaires right now, I think Hupsaiya recognizes there's blood in the water. He can attack right now and put this man to bed, put him back on Crazy Mountain where he belongs. The Nexus being put down at 1 o'clock. That is kind of Crazy Mountain behavior, considering the proximity of Hupsaiya's army. So, yeah, what are you going to do? Are you going to actually try to save this? The idols, once again, absolutely eliminating a lot of the front line here, thanks to their minimal splash damage, but it's going to be more than enough. And now the Drakodins, bruised from the last fight, they are going to be zoned away. This Nexus will have to be canceled at some point, or will it? Instead, looks like Veeq is going to try to add some last-ditch extra static defense here, but his Drakodins are gone. His Legionnaires are all that remains. He never added additional production. He's only now putting down the Wardens. The charge is in. There's only the 2 finished ones, and he's going to call GG because Hupsaiya had that hook, line, and sinker, boys. We got him on the board. A dub for the man. And you know what? I hope he learned something from these matches. He did say so afterwards. I distinctly remember him saying, GG, Veeq, thanks for games. I learned a lot. I mean, when have you ever heard Hupsaiya be so positive? I want to know. Certainly not when he plays Starcraft 2 or Age of Empires 4. And that's why he should play Cosmonic Brood War on stream instead. If you agree, post it in the comments below. Like this video, dude. It's a thumbs up kind of marathon. And tell Hupsaiya he's cool when he streams on twitch.tv/Hupsaiya. Link will be in the description. GG boys, and glad we got to see some PvP action.